Often mentioned to be one of the most dangerous jobs in America, being a delivery driver definitely has its pros as well as cons. Aside from the horror stories you hear of drivers being called to abandoned houses with malicious intent, being stabbed or even shot, I had no doubt in my mind that I wanted to try out being a delivery driver. My reasoning was led by the fact that it would be decent money for a college student, and I would get to do what I genuinely enjoy doing. Driving around, blasting music, satisfying my nicotine addiction while on the clock, and getting to explore new roads and various landscapes. I didn't think very much about the dangers, but I must have subconsciously realized that the area I was going to be delivering in was mostly a wealthier business district with little crime. My sophomore year of college was over, and after leaving my previous job to focus on my heavy course load, it was time to take advantage of the summer. I was hired at the first and only place I applied to for delivery. This was about a 30-minute commute from my house, and I would be delivering in a town and city that I previously had no familiarity with. Besides the nervousness of trying to impress at the start of my new job, I was excited to get started and get in my car. I must note that I was never warned of anything or told any alarming stories by the management or other delivery drivers. That's because there were none, until I landed the delivery shift 6 months later that would traumatize me and force changes in policies of this company. It was a normal night per usual, and I was on a delivery to the neighboring city only about 15 minutes out. There was a confusing numbering system on the small apartment complexes that occupied the left side of the road. I believed that my GPS took me to the right lot, but when I pulled in, I couldn't seem to find the apartment number that was listed. A nice guy was walking his cute little dog, so I politely asked if this was 22 whatever street, and he responded talkatively. He said no, and that he realized how confusing these streets can get. Before I get a chance to ask if he knows what direction to send me in, he quickly asked an assortment of questions, none of which really made me uncomfortable. He saw I was delivering food, and asked what it was. I had not put the light on the top of the car, so it made sense that he was curious. Not a crazy amount of places deliver around here. He started to get oddly excited, asking if I had a menu, what time we deliver until, and if I'm the only one delivering on this Sunday night. After quickly answering and interrupting, I asked if he could point me to the way because I was in a rush to get back. He said he wasn't too sure, but insists to walk his dog up to the road while I drive out so he could help me figure it out. After a minute or two of navigating, he told me where to try next. I thanked him, smiled, and told him to feel free to call for a delivery, and I'll be back out with his food in no time. I said this because he said he was starving, asked for a menu, and seemed so excited about the fact that we delivered. As the night came close to an end, I was hoping I didn't get any more delivery calls after 9:15. Delivery shut down at 9:30, but if a call was placed anywhere before that, I would be stuck driving and not get out until at least 10. What do you know? An order was placed at 9:20, and I would leave with it at 9:40. At this point, I'm on autopilot and just following my GPS, not paying any attention to where I might be going. As I recognized the familiar street which I had only seen for the first time today, and hear my GPS say to turn left and 0.2 miles, I realized that it has to be that guy that helped me out earlier. I pull in, park, approach the door and knock. I hear faint music that seems to have gotten louder after my knock, so I ring the doorbell. I'm greeted by the friendly man, both of us smiling at each other. I guess you decided cooking wasn't for you tonight, I say lightheartedly in a humorous manner. He then said something along the lines of, cooking isn't something I would waste my time on, plus I believe raw food is the most authentic way to feast. I laughed, thinking to myself that this guy was definitely an odd one. He insists that I step in and put the bags down in his kitchen. Most of the time I don't go into the customers' homes, but it wasn't so uncommon. I comply, step in, and he tells me to take off my shoes. This made me a bit uncomfortable. Never have I been told to come into someone's house on my delivery job and then told to take off my shoes. This is an in-and-out job. I wasn't here to sit down and kick up my feet. I figured this guy just has some issues or OCD, so as I slipped my shoes off, this moment seemed to move in slow motion and last longer than it did. My eyes fixed on this strange runner/small carpet next to a shoe rack that was made of what seemed to be black feathers. Simultaneously, I'm listening to the song he has playing, which gave me a sense of extreme discomfort and anxiety. It was scarily familiar. I almost felt as if I was experiencing the feeling of déjà vu. I follow him to his counter and place the bags down, next to what looked like a stuffed crow nativity scene. He sees me examining it and says, "Did you know when a crow dies, a mob of 100 live ones will gather in ceremony? It's their way to learn about threats, and they hesitate to revisit locations where they have encountered a dead crow." I pulled out the payment slip for him to sign and shook off his previous statements, saying, "Interesting." As he signs, he continues the subject and says something about how he thinks we can learn a lot of lessons from the behaviors of crows. I thanked him for signing, and as I moved to walk out, said, "I'll have to look into that," hoping to shut him up about his obsession with crows. As I'm putting my shoes back on, he says, "One last thing. If I said someone was killed here, would you be hesitant to come back? If I said I was responsible, would you revisit this location?" I panicked, sped out, and fled to work with thoughts rushing through my head. A couple of sleepless nights after that, and 5 months later, and the run-in continues to haunt me. Looking back, it seems as if he saw something about me that made him want to know if I was the only delivery driver working. After telling him our close time for delivery, it seemed like he purposely planned to wait until the latest possible time, ensuring he would be my last delivery. I really still think about what this man is up to every time I go to work. This is a story that I'm always aching to get off my chest, and I think this is somewhere for me to post it under some anonymity. I'm new to Reddit, so please let me know if this is the wrong subreddit. Anyone who wants to read more about this can DM me for articles or proof, as this story is not yet over. To start, I'm a teenage female. I have my own apartment for the first time, having recently moved to a new city to study. I quickly made friends with a group of fun but somewhat troubled teenagers that spent their days loitering at a local coffee shop. One girl I met in particular is who this story is about. I instantly felt a strong sense of caring for her. She is sweet, bubbly, and the moment I met her remains one of my favorite and most clear memories of her. This girl tells me of a man named Mike, who's like a father to her in her words. He wants to adopt her. Let's note this girl doesn't have an ideal family. Her father is in jail, and she has a very low self-esteem as he just doesn't give her the care she deserves. I soon met Mike, and right away I thought he was great. I was being so naive. He was a scary-looking biker in his 50s, had some awesome tattoos, told stories of great experiences, travel, and seemed quite educated. I thought it was so mature, and didn't think it was odd that we quickly became good friends, as the girl previously mentioned felt safe with him, and we both cared for her. We would drive around, talk about everything. I went to see him crying once, and he made me feel better within a few hours when the boy I was dating cheated on and then dumped me. I felt powerful having a friend like him. His favorite subject to talk about, though, was the girl. He had met her a couple of years prior by chance at this coffee shop. She looked exactly like his eldest daughter had at her age. He told me that 2 years prior, his oldest daughter, out of 3, had committed suicide. The girl had filled a void, and I felt for him, so I understood. A few months passed, and the girl was staying with him. She's soon to be the legal adoption age, and she can choose to be adopted by him, and he's getting more and more excited. Alongside her, I'm the person who's closest to him. We spend time talking on the phone, visiting. I sleep at his house. I hang out with the girl and I'm teaching her how to drive. Mike was like a father to me in this new town. He watches out for me. He tells me I'm important to him like the girl is. He would do anything for me. Some of the things he does for me include letting me leave a project car in his yard, buying parts for it and helping me work on it, and aggressively confronting a boy who took advantage of me while I was intoxicated. Sorry for the huge setup, but it needs to be understood that I trusted and looked up to Mike with everything I had. 6 months after meeting him, this girl turns of age to be adopted. I'm now staying in a nearby town, not seeing them as much but still visiting on weekends. I get a call from Mike, and he's thrilled to tell me she's asked to be adopted by him, and he wants to have a big party. I'm excited and congratulate him. The last time I saw the girl was a few days before this, and just as our meeting is vivid in my memory, so was our last goodbye. A few days later, I hear she's been reported missing, and Mike is gone. Ignoring my texts, and eventually deleting his social media, everyone is in a panic. This girl is adored by everyone, and is as innocent as they come. This is the start of 2 months of major anxiety and guilt, and hurt that Mike had left me. I thought he was there for me. For some reason, I still didn't think he would do anything to hurt her. He loved her and protected her. Until a couple weeks later on Facebook, I see a comment on one of the articles. The police are now searching for Mike, wanting to question him although he's not a suspect per se. A girl has commented, "I'm Mike's daughter. Can someone please get me in touch with the family immediately? He's dangerous, and I don't believe she's safe if she's with him." I message her right away, giving her the girl's grandmother's phone number, and ask her what she means by he's dangerous. As we talk, I learned quite a few things. He never had 3 daughters, only 2, and this girl I'm talking to is the oldest. When she was a child, he sexually abused her, and the girl who I care about so much is a splitting image of his real daughter when she was a teenager. They had a falling out 2 years prior, the time of his oldest daughter's suicide. I also learned that the girl certainly had not wanted to be adopted. She had thought this was too much, however, she was being groomed and enjoyed the gifts. Someone who would give her whatever she wanted. A father figure while hers was not around. Suddenly I began thinking about all the red flags. How could I have been so stupid? He had talked about his time in the Angels. He had put a man in the hospital shortly before I met him after a bar argument. He spent his days hanging around this coffee shop with teenagers. I have experiences with creepy and dangerous men of all ages. He totally had me fooled. I think of the times he told me he cared about me as he did for her. The times he picked me up drunk from parties, drank at my house, when I slept at his. Never once did he say or do anything inappropriate, but he had always been overly protective. The police and news reporters are calling me almost daily, asking me what I know about him, asking for all these details. I ignore the reporters, fearing that he'll see me on TV. He's eventually found, questioned, and released. Not a suspect. He disappeared again, and I never spoke with him. 2 months after this lovely girl goes missing, her body is found. It's deemed a homicide. And this was 1 year ago. There are no leads and no other info released by police. I've not heard from Mike. There have been many crazy theories since then. Lots of speculation. I don't want to believe that he did it, and he's not been arrested or made a suspect, but everyone thinks that he's very likely. He lied about many things. I learned the truth of his real daughter, and can't possibly include it all here. I wonder where he is. I wonder if one day I'll be minding my business, and then he'll appear. Something in me still doesn't believe he could hurt me. Something else wonders, could it have been my body found? But the worst part is the tremendous guilt I feel. I was with him all the time. I spent time with these two. Why didn't I intervene? I'm so sorry. I've been reading everyone's stories, a lot that are messed up as fuck, and thought I'd share my own. This is my first time posting, and very new to Reddit, so forgive me if I mess this up a bit. I had a really horrible nightmare recently that's been taking me back to a bad time in my life, so I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I was 19. I felt like I was in a pretty good place in life. I'm 30 now, just to give you some context. I had been dating a guy, Brad, that I got along with well, but we were more like buddies. It was my first real grown-up relationship. I had moved out on my own after I turned 18 and was enjoying a new, established life. My boyfriend at the time was a good guy, was a couple of years older than me, but was a typical young dude who wanted to hang out with his friends all the time. We fought about that all the time, and my interest in him started to fade. I was working for a payment processing company. The main office was in California. I lived in Utah at the time, so we had coworkers that we would talk to on the phone and through instant messaging. After working there for like 6 months, a slew of new people were hired at the California office. We all had our pictures loaded on our internal company website. Some of my close girlfriends and I were scoping out the new dudes to see if there was anyone we thought was hot, just in good fun. And that was when I spotted Matt. It was like an instant attraction. I can't really describe it well, but I think everyone feels that way at some point. He was good looking, but it wasn't really about that. There was just something about him. To cut out a lot of boring details, Matt and I got to talking, mostly work-related stuff, but eventually the talks became more personal. That turned into exchanging numbers. This was back before text was unlimited, so we just talked on the phone a lot. It took us quite a while before we expressed any interest in each other. At the time, I thought he was sweet and passionate and interesting. He had so many hobbies. I just hadn't ever met anyone like him, and we had a lot in common. I should mention that I was still with my boyfriend Brad at the time. It was awful of me. I told Matt about him, about how I felt unwanted in the relationship, and that it didn't feel like we were even together. He consoled me and made me feel understood. Throughout our conversations, though, there were things about him that I didn't pay much attention to that should have bothered me. At times he would grill me in a very subtle way about my guy friends, if I was still in a party phase, being that I was only 19. He was 24, so he, of course, was mature and ready to settle down. I told him I didn't really go to many parties. I wasn't promiscuous. I was ready to really commit to someone if the person was right. Looking back, I was obviously not ready for any such type of commitment, but I was so smitten by him. I felt like it was love at first sight, even from just seeing a picture. Side note, where I grew up, many of my friends got married right out of high school, so the idea of settling down at 19 wasn't new to me. We eventually made plans after opening up to each other in so many emotional ways, for me to visit him. He paid for my flight, and after a few months of talking, I flew out to see him. And the chemistry in person was even better. I had never felt such a passionate, urgent, clawing attraction to anyone. It was electric between us. When I got home, I broke up with Brad. I told him about Matt, and it was the first time I had seen him cry. I felt awful for doing that to him since he was and really is an incredible guy. He took it with such grace, it really showed his character. He wanted me to be happy, and despite how hard it was to tell Brad, I felt so much better afterwards and felt like I could really pursue things with Matt. I mention all this stuff because it does play a role later on. On my second visit, he proposed. He didn't have a ring, but it seemed romantic and real just the same. We were lying in bed, candles lit everywhere, sipping whiskey and listening to music. I still know what song was playing. And despite the fact that I was so in love with him at this point already, when he asked, I got a really sick feeling in my stomach. I couldn't understand it. I said yes and cried, but deep down I wanted to throw up. Perhaps it was the fact that we hadn't known each other very long. Perhaps it was because this was only our second in-person visit. Perhaps it was because it felt like he was rushing things. Or perhaps my subconscious knew something wasn't quite right. One thing that did bother me was that he still lived with his parents. He had told me he was just trying to save money until he could move out again. Being that he lived in California, I know how expensive it is to live out there, so I understood. He was very private and didn't get along with his parents at all. His mom laid on the couch all day watching shitty movies, and his dad was very explosive. Matt told me that his dad was diagnosed as bipolar, and he was also diagnosed as well. I had never met anyone, or wasn't aware of it anyhow, that was bipolar, so I didn't really know what to expect. Because he didn't get along with his parents, he locked his bedroom door. I was always a bit fascinated by this when I would visit him. He would unlock the gate to unlock the house door, which in turn would unlock his bedroom door. And inside his bedroom, he had a closet that he always kept locked. He would only open it when I would visit. Nothing nefarious from what I could tell at first. It was just a computer, books and boxes, pictures and clothes. He told me he didn't like his parents snooping and left it at that. Things were going great between us until one day, when we were talking on the phone. I mentioned I was going to a party that night. I could instantly hear the tone of his voice change. He sounded anxious and somewhat cold. He started asking me about guys that were going to be there, when I would be back, if I was interested in any of them. He threw it back at me, like, I thought you were out of your party stage. I was a little taken aback by the questions, but I answered each one, hoping to ease his mind. I ended up going to that party, which was really just a group of my friends hanging out, and called him when I got home. I think we ended up having our first fight that night, as he was acting jealous and drilling me with all sorts of questions. Because of that experience, I felt like it might be better to just not tell him if I was going to parties in the future. It had created so much drama over a harmless night with friends that it just didn't seem like it was worth bringing up to him again. Not at least until our relationship progressed, and perhaps then he would learn to trust me. The next one I went to, I didn't tell him about it. It never came up and he didn't find out, until much later. Matt flies out at some point to visit me in UT this time. He stays with me and my roommates. I was roommates with two gay guys that were together, and they were like my older brothers. We had so much fun together and they really looked out for me. They were about 10 years older than me as well, and it helped to have their perspective. When they met Matt, they instantly didn't like him, at all. I didn't understand, but that was the running theme. Anyone I introduced to Matt, nobody ever liked him. No one could really give me a reason, and if they had one, they never told me. They just said something was off about him. While Matt was visiting, I ended up going out with some girlfriends, and he said he was okay to stay home and give me some time with them to do girl stuff. When I got home that night, Matt was waiting for me, sitting on my bed, his laptop in his hand. I could instantly tell that something was wrong. In a clipped voice, he said, "I know you went to a party and didn't tell me." This night should have opened my eyes to what he really was. If I had been smart, I would have ended things then. But I didn't. Matt tells me that while I was out, an anonymous person had sent him an email warning him that I wasn't who I said I was. In the email, this anonymous person said that they were just concerned for Matt and wanted to warn him about my infidelity and lying ways. Anonymous had hacked my email and supposedly sent him personal emails that I exchanged with my ex Brad and other people I had dated before I even met Matt. Anonymous had also sent screenshots of my friends' MySpace accounts back during the good old MySpace days, where I was in pictures at parties or hanging out with other friends. That's how he found out I had gone to a party with friends a few weeks back and didn't tell him. This anonymous person had supposedly been watching me. My first instinct told me that Anonymous didn't really exist at all. It was really Matt, and this was him hacking into my things trying to control me. Matt was relating real things in my emails, so I knew he had seen something, but I didn't really know how he had gotten the information. I had never given him my passwords or anything. We had a huge fight, and I demanded that he show me this supposed email that Anonymous had sent him. Matt had told me before when we first started talking that he knew a lot about computers, coding and programming, so it wasn't a stretch to believe that he had the ability to hack into my email and social media. When I demanded to see the email from Anonymous, Matt fumbled and tried to get into his own email to show me. His account ended up getting locked out due to too many incorrect password attempts, and that just solidified it in my mind. And this guy's a computer genius, but he can't get into his own email account and somehow forgot his password? But throughout our arguing, he somehow managed to turn things around to make me feel guilty. After all, I was the one who had lied about the party. I had cheated on Brad with Matt. It was my fault, and I wasn't to be trusted. By the end of the night, I 100% believed that Anonymous was real, and that someone was watching me and trying to warn Matt. Even worse, Matt had convinced me that Anonymous was actually my best friend Brittany at the time. I asked him why would she do that? How? He told me she was jealous of our relationship, that she was a common factor in everything that had been sent to him, and that she was at these parties and knew everything about me. Maybe she had seen me type in my email password before. And like the idiot I was, I started to believe that too. So much happened in our 3-year relationship that I can't really go into everything. As anyone can guess, our relationship got worse. I stopped being friends with Brittany after more emails were sent to Matt about my sins and lies. This time, Matt had actual emails to show me someone was sending them. I was completely convinced it was Brittany. I somewhat confronted her about it, and that made things worse. In my mind, she was saying she didn't think Matt was good for me because she wanted him and envied our relationship. Besides, it couldn't be Matt. He loved me and wouldn't do that to me. My roommates didn't like Matt, and so when he ended up moving to UT to be closer to me, I had to move back in with my dad until I could figure something out. Matt moved in with us as well. Living there around Christmas time, it was the first time Matt laid hands on me. I don't even remember the argument now, but he pushed me as hard as he could into the TV stand in our room, the corner hitting my back. I couldn't believe he had done that to me, but I forgave him when he said he wouldn't do it again. And if I ever threatened to break up with him, he would tell me he would commit suicide, and it scared me. Eventually I moved with him to California, and we moved into the sad house with his parents. Things got worse and worse. I didn't have a house key, let alone a key to our bedroom, so on days or nights he would go into a rage. He would kick me out of the house and I'd have to stay in a hotel. We carpooled to work until I could get my SUV and move to California. And one morning on the way to work, he was mad that I had gotten up really late. Our argument escalated to the point where he was screaming at me at the top of his lungs, spit flying from his mouth and hitting the steering wheel. As we were getting onto the freeway, he screamed for me to get out, reached over to open the passenger door and shoved me out. I had to walk a ways to get to a payphone. I wasn't allowed to have my cell phone anymore, and called my sister who lived about an hour away. It was humiliating, walking that street in my work clothes, people seeing me getting pushed out. Still, even after my sister picked me up and begged me to leave him, the next day I went back. When I finally brought my SUV to California, he would follow me to work with his own car before heading to work himself. After work, he would be waiting outside, parked at the curb. I would be so worried that one of my male coworkers were going to say something to me and he would see. I would keep my head down and walk as quickly away from everyone so they couldn't say anything to me. He pushed me into bushes or down to the ground on walks if we get in a fight. Dragged me out of bed at 2 a.m. screaming that I was a whore and disgusting when he found an email I had sent to a male friend to say happy birthday. Kicked me out on Christmas morning because he couldn't turn off his mind all the terrible things I had done to him. I know it's hard to understand why someone stays in that situation, but there were amazing things about him too. Also, I think at some point, Matt had made me hate everything around me, even myself, and the only thing I had was him. He convinced me that my parents, who I had been very close to, were also jealous of what we had and didn't want me to be happy. That all my other friends, some I'd had since first grade, didn't appreciate me. It was a constant mindfuck. I think the most humiliating thing that happened was I had gotten a new job towards the end of our relationship. It was an amazing job, and I felt so lucky to have landed it. I gave Matt my work number and email address so he could check in on me when he needed to. My second week of working there, my boss, who was a male, approached me and told me that he takes all new employees out to lunch as congratulations. I got a sinking feeling, but I didn't know how to turn him down. If Matt found out, I knew he'd be furious. I thanked my boss and he arranged for lunch that day. We went to lunch and I kept trying to reassure myself that Matt wouldn't find out before I had a chance to tell him. I wanted to tell him in person and let him know my boss was married, that it's something all new employees get. I tried to focus on lunch, but as time ticked on, I got more and more anxious. We finally left the restaurant. My boss had driven us, and when we pulled into our work parking lot, my heart sank because I instantly saw Matt's car and him leaning against the side of it. He made his way towards us once we had parked, blood rage on his face, and when Matt reached us, he stuck his hand out for a hostile handshake towards my boss. He yelled, "I'm Matt, her fiancé." Matt never called me that unless he wanted to try and claim me. He said it with such hate that my boss glanced at me nervously, then started to try to explain that he was my boss and nothing was going on. Matt, at this point, was just staring at me with his dead eyes, and I could only imagine what he wanted to do to me at that point. "I tried calling you, but you didn't pick up, and after 2 hours I got worried," Matt said. He could barely keep the angry tremble out of his voice. I told my boss that everything was okay and I would meet him inside. I could tell he didn't want to leave me alone, but after I reassured him again, he went back inside. The whore and fucking lying bitch and rage that came from Matt after that was no surprise, as well as the shoving and angry grips on my arms. He was of course convinced I had cheated on him, and after what seemed like forever he finally left. I avoided my boss the rest of the day, and when I got home all my clothes were thrown out into the family living room and our bedroom door was locked. His mom was in the same family room, still laying on that beaten couch and watching reruns of who knows what. She didn't even say anything to me. This was her life, and that was just the way her son was. Taped to the door was the infamous Johnny Cash picture of him flipping off the camera. Behind it was an awful letter about how I was the most disgusting person he'd ever met. It was about 8 pages long. It was the most hurtful letter to read, because despite everything he had done to me, I couldn't stop myself from remembering those first few months we met and how in love with him I was. I felt like my soul knew his, as cheesy as it sounds, but I was finally accepting the fact that our relationship would just never change. I eventually left. I remember that day pretty clearly. The Dark Knight had just been released in theaters, and we were getting ready to go see it. I was putting my makeup on when we started arguing about something small. There was always something with him. Usually it was because I would get annoyed when he'd ask for reassurance. Reassurance that I loved him. Reassurance that I wasn't cheating. Reassurance that no guys had hit on me that day. I would do my best to answer any questions he had, but sometimes I would be so frustrated that I would tell him to just stop bothering me with questions. It would escalate and escalate. And this was one of those days. He flew into a rage like he always did, pinned me on the bed and was screaming as loud as he could, spit hitting my face. He grabbed my jaw and shook it so hard I started crying. It was the most scared of him I'd ever been. That was the day I left. He stormed out, and as soon as he did, I called my dad crying and asked him if I could come home. I packed up a few clothes, leaving all my other personal belongings behind, and made the 15-hour drive back home to Utah. A lot of major things happened in my life that involved him, but I don't want to get into them, especially the things that happened after I left. I have so many stories of bad and creepy things he's done to me, but I can save that for another time, I guess. I kept tabs on him as I moved on with my life. About 2 years after I left, I found out that he was arrested for impersonating a cop. He had bought a car that resembled an undercover cop car, had loaded guns and knives, handcuffs in his car, a police scanner, and was wearing a highway patrol uniform when an officer noticed him parked in a suspicious location at 3 in the morning. When the police seized his laptop, they found over 2,000 images of child pornography. He was sentenced to a year in prison. It made me think about his privacy in his locked closet. It made me sick to think about the things he was hiding in there. And what haunts me the most now, though, is that 2 years ago, his current girlfriend, or current girlfriend at the time, I'm not sure now, found me through Facebook. She found out where I worked and reached out to me. I'm happily married and have buried that part of my life, so it was a complete shock. She called my place of work. When the call was transferred to me, she said, "I know this is going to sound strange, but my name is Amanda. I'm engaged to Matt. You know him, right?" My first question to her was, "Are you okay?" She wasn't. She had horror stories almost as bad as mine, and some even worse. She was still with him, and she felt like he had lied to her about a lot of things. about his friends, about his career in life, even about me. Matt had talked to her about me. He even had intimate pics and videos of me still, and had shown them to her nearly 10 years later. Why, I'm not sure, but it made me sick. We talked for hours. While we talked, Matt started doing the same thing he used to do to me. He called, and when she didn't answer, he left a voicemail. When she didn't call right back, he called again and again, until it got to the point he was calling her every 2 minutes. I could hear the fear and anxiety in her voice, and it took me back to that time in my life. My heart was breaking for her. Amanda told me that after work she was going to leave and was going to drive to her mom's. She told me she would call me when she was safe. I missed her call that night. It was from a different number, and I was worried that it was Matt. But she left a voicemail telling me she had reached her mom's house, it was okay, and that she would try to get back in touch with me the next day. I haven't heard from her since. I did try reaching out to her once after, but I didn't hear from her again. I think she's still with him. So many people have told me that if I would have stayed longer, they think he would have eventually killed me. I believe it definitely may have happened. I worry about her, and I keep thinking one day I'm going to Google her and find out she's dead.